When my own son threw my suitcase into the rain and yelled
It's
at me
all right,
that I
dear
was nothing
sister.
but a nuisance,
I am here for
something
you now.
inside me died that night. At 72, I found myself shivering under a bridge, watching the storm wash away the last shred of my dignity. But what Mateo and his wife didn't know was that while they discarded me like a worthless object, fate was weaving a web of protection that would take them by surprise. The woman they underestimated was about to become their worst nightmare. But before continuing, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and share your views in the comments. We love to hear how far our stories go. The rain was relentless on that fateful night. It seemed as if the heavens themselves were weeping in indignation at what was happening to me. I felt the impact of my suitcase hitting the wet asphalt, a sound that would be forever etched in my memory. Mateo stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, his face twisted in an expression of contempt I'll never forget. No more words were needed. Her silence screamed everything I needed to understand. I no longer had a place in her house, no longer had a place in her life. Something inside me refused to beg. With my fingers stiffened by rheumatism, I picked up my already soaked suitcase and started walking. My sandals made a wet sound with each step as I walked further away. No umbrella, no suitable coat, just a thin sweater that had been warm and cozy just 2 hours before. The sound of the door closing behind me resonated like a final judgment. Curiously, I didn't cry that night. Instead, I walked until my legs gave out, finally finding refuge under a nearby overpass. The concrete was cold and damp, but at least it partially protected me from the relentless rain. I dragged my soaked suitcase to use as a makeshift seat and leaned back against the cold wall. The sounds of tires splashing in the puddles were like a soundtrack to my humiliation. My body ached, but not as much as my heart. My joints felt like wet paper, brittle and fragile, and my heart felt like ash. A few people walked past me, but no one even looked at me twice. To them, I was just another homeless old woman in a city with many. This perception was what scared me the most. I no longer felt like myself. It was as if I'd become invisible, disposable, just another problem to be ignored. Mateo's voice echoed in my mind, the way he pronounced the word nuisance, as if I were an unwanted task, an inconvenient item on a to-do list. As if the years I raised him, fed him, and loved him had never existed. I remembered the scraped knees I kissed to heal the sleepless nights when he was sick, the meals I skipped so he could eat when times were tough. And now, in his eyes, I was just a burden to be discarded. The wind grew stronger as the night wore on. I pulled out a thin blanket I'd found in my suitcase, damp and inadequate against the cold, but it was all I had. My body trembled constantly, not only from the cold, but from shame and disbelief. Maybe some of you know that devastating feeling when the people you've given everything to look at you as if you're worthless. I didn't sleep much that night. I heard cars, distant sirens, and the sound of something inside me breaking beyond repair. Around 3 a.m, the rain finally eased. I was just beginning to nod off when I heard footsteps approaching. They weren't hurried or heavy, but measured and purposeful. I raised my head and for a moment thought I was dreaming. Viviana, my younger sister, was standing in front of me. Her hair was soaked, her makeup was gone, but she was looking at me as if we'd just met after an eternity. In a way, it was true. We hadn't spoken much after he moved to Cancun. Life separated us. Family complications, small resentments that grew with time and silence. But there she was, like a miracle wrapped in a soaked coat and silent fury. Initially, she said nothing. He simply knelt beside me, brushed my wet hair away from my face, and placed his hand on mine. That was the first truly human touch I'd felt in weeks, maybe months. He helped me up without a word, took my suitcase, and led me to his rental car, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sitting in his car with the heater on full blast and a blanket draped over my shoulders, I tried not to collapse. He handed me a still, warm thermos redolent of honey and mint. I took a sip and felt my first glimmer of security since being kicked out of Mateo's house. We didn't speak until we reached the main road. "Are you coming with me?" he said simply. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I couldn't imagine going anywhere else. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. I think he saw everything in my face, in the way I held the teacup in both hands, as if it were the only thing keeping me anchored to this world. The road stretched out before us, long and silent. Every few kilometers I glanced at Viviana. The same determined eyes, the same upright posture I remembered from our childhood. Viviana was always fire where I was water. She flared up when people hurt her. I held back. I was surviving. But that night, I began to wonder if just surviving would be enough. When we arrived at a motel on the outskirts of Puebla, he handed me a room key and a bag of clean clothes. I took a hot shower, my first in days, scrubbing the rain dirt and humiliation off my skin. I stared at my reflection in the mirror until the steam fogged it up completely. Then I slept, not soundly, not peacefully, but at least in a bed. The next morning, when she told me we were going to Mexico City, I didn't ask why. I just followed her because something inside me had changed. Not immediately, not loudly, but enough that I could feel it. Maybe you've felt it too. That silent turn, that moment when you realize, this time, I won't let it go. This time, I won't swallow my pain just to keep the peace, not when it costs me everything. I woke up to a low hotel ceiling and the constant hum of the air conditioner. The bed was very firm, the sheets rough, but compared to the concrete and rain of the night before, it felt like paradise. My muscles ached, but my hands were warm for the first time in days. I sat up slowly, wrapping the motel blanket around my shoulders, trying to get my bearings. Viviana was already dressed and packing her things. She moved quickly, focused, as if she'd been planning something all night. He didn't ask how I slept or offer small talk. "We need to get moving." That's all he said. I followed her to the parking lot. The sky was clear blue, the air thick with the humidity typical of the Mexican coast before midday. I slid into the passenger seat, and as soon as the doors closed, she started the engine. Without hesitation. 10 minutes later, we stopped at a gas station. He left the engine running and told me to wait. He returned with a thermos of fresh coffee, a breakfast sandwich, and a folder. He handed me the folder first. Inside was a printed ad for a property in Mexico City, a fully furnished 2-bedroom ocean view condo. The price made my stomach clench in surprise. I looked at her, perplexed. "This place is yours," she said simply. "I bought it this morning." I couldn't say anything. My mouth opened, but no words came out. My hands held the folder, as if it might disintegrate at any moment. Viviana kept her eyes fixed on the road. I'd already transferred the money. "It's in your name. No mortgage, no tricks." I turned the page. There were photos, a balcony with an ocean view, a kitchen with granite countertops, a guest room with a desk. It looked like the kind of place someone would stay for 2 weeks in the summer, not the kind of place a person like me would live permanently. On the last page was a bank receipt, a deposit into a new savings account, $5 million. I looked up stunned. "Your savings?" Viviana explained without taking her eyes off the road. "Only yours. I kept them for years." "You didn't know because I didn't tell you. Now you know." I leaned back in my seat. The folder weighed on my lap. The coffee was forgotten. My ears were ringing as if someone had set off a firework inside my chest. I couldn't form a complete thought. The numbers were there on the page, too big to be ignored, too surreal to be believed. He pulled the car back onto the highway. We didn't say anything for a long time. I watched the landscape pass by the window. Shopping malls, palm trees, roadside restaurants. Everything seemed normal, but nothing about me felt normal. Something had changed profoundly, and I still couldn't tell whether it was gratitude or shame I felt. We turned onto a quieter, narrower road lined with towering palm trees. After a few blocks, we reached an entrance with a closed gate. Viviana entered a code, and the iron gate slowly opened. A security guard greeted us with a gesture, and she responded naturally. The building had few floors. It was cream-colored with white balconies and a blue-tiled roof. It looked like something out of a postcard. Viviana parked in a reserved spot near the entrance, took my suitcase from the trunk, and carried it inside without waiting. The lobby smelled of lemon and new carpet. A woman at the front desk smiled and handed Viviana a welcome pack. She pointed at me without saying a word. The receptionist looked at me with a kindness that reminded me of the way people look at stray dogs they wish they could help. We took the elevator in silence. On the third floor, Viviana opened the door to apartment 3C. It was brighter than she expected. The walls were a soft beige, the sofa light, gray. Light streamed in through the sliding glass doors onto the balcony. I walked to the railing and looked out. The ocean stretched to the horizon, merging with the sky. I could hear it steady, powerful, alive. Behind me, Viviana dropped her suitcase on the floor and wiped her hands. "This is where you live now," she said. "I'll be staying in the apartment across the street for a while, so don't you dare disappear." I turned around, my hands still on the balcony railing. I wanted to say thank you, but the words seemed insignificant in the face of all this. Instead, I simply nodded slowly. Viviana approached, her expression serious. "I know what he did. I know what they did. You don't need to talk about it if you don't want to, but you're not going to let them take anything else away from you ever again." He looked me straight in the eyes. His tone was firm, unsentimental. "This place is yours, the money is yours, and I've already contacted Graciela." That caught my attention. Graciela Holanda, Viviana's lawyer friend from college. Intelligent, relentless, meticulous. I haven't seen her in years. Graciela is drafting the documents now. Financial blockades, legal protections. Whatever you don't want exposed will be sealed, and whatever they try to take will be 2 steps ahead. I let out a slow sigh. My fingers tightened on the edge of the balcony. Viviana's voice softened slightly. "You're not a guest here. You're not a dependent. You're the owner, and I need you to start acting like one." I stayed on the balcony for a long time after she left. The ocean never stopped moving, nor did the thoughts in my head. Mateo thought he'd buried me, that I'd rot quietly in some corner of a homeless shelter. He thought shame would keep me silent. I had no idea I was about to get back everything he tried to take from me. 3 days after moving in, Viviana organized a small welcome party in the downstairs reception hall. She didn't ask if I wanted one. She simply texted me the time and told me to wear something blue. She'd already bought 2 new outfits for me and hung them in the closet. I chose the long-sleeved one, a light fabric that didn't stand out but made me feel like myself again. I arrived a few minutes before 6. The room was softly lit with snacks arranged on white plates and a view of the ocean through a row of glass windows. About a dozen people were present, mostly other residents of the building, retired couples, a few widows, and one gentleman who reminded me of my late husband, although thinner and with a sharper chin. I didn't register most of the names, but I recognized their warmth the kind that doesn't ask for too much too soon. Viviana made sure to keep me close. She introduced me with enough detail to be polite, never getting personal. He never mentioned what had happened. He never mentioned Mateo. He just told people that I had come to Mexico City for a new beginning. I was standing near the window, watching the light disappear over the water, when the building's security guard came through the side door. He made a slow round of the living room. Then he stopped when he saw me. 3C is across from Miss Viviana's, right? She asked, pointing to the apartment number on my name tag. I nodded. She's smart. She doesn't miss a detail. You have a good person looking after you. He lowered his voice. You might want to keep an eye out for movement in the hallway. We received a report of someone snooping around the mailboxes late last night. I felt a knot in my chest, but I thanked him for the warning. Viviana raised her glass and made a short toast, saying only that she was happy I was there, and that second chances were worth celebrating. The crowd applauded, and everything felt normal. Until I noticed that as he finished his speech, his eyes turned toward the door that had just opened. I turned around and saw them Mateo and Marisa. He was wearing a dress shirt he rarely wore, but this time it was impeccable. Marisa was dressed in beige and gold, her curly hair loose her heels making a soft click as they entered the room. They smiled, as if they belonged there. My stomach tightened. Viviana walked straight toward them. I didn't hear what she said, but her body language made it clear they weren't welcome. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a fuss, but he blocked my path like an insurmountable wall. Mateo looked over his shoulder at me and smiled, as if nothing had happened, as if the last time he saw me hadn't been in the rain screaming while I clung to my dignity like a dying flame. I didn't say anything. My hand gripped the edge of the refreshment table so tightly my knuckles turned white. Viviana made a discreet sign and an employee approached. The conversation was brief. Mateo and Marisa held their position for a few more seconds, then turned and left. Marisa didn't even look back. The room slowly returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. People noticed the interruption, but no one asked any questions. I silently thanked them. Viviana returned to my side, took a piece of fruit from the tray, and said calmly, I told you they were coming. I nodded. She'd warned me that morning that she'd seen a comment from a friend of Marisa's online, something too specific to be a coincidence. Viviana was already 3 steps ahead, as always. Once the meeting was over, she walked me back upstairs. We said goodnight in the hallway, and I entered my apartment. I sat on the edge of the couch and waited. Not for anything specific, just waiting like an animal sensing danger. They hadn't come to apologize or explain. They came to see what else they could get. But now, they knew. I wasn't where they'd left me. I was no longer the woman who'd set out into the storm with her soaking wet suitcase. I was sheltered, protected, and no longer alone. Still, I didn't feel safe enough to relax. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the side drawer of the hall closet and took out a new notebook Viviana had given me. I clicked a pen and wrote a sentence at the top of the page. What they took from me, they will give back. I drew a line underneath and wrote 3 words: house, name, power. The party was over, the curtain was up, and they'd entered the stage thinking they still controlled the story. But I had the pen now, and I'd write the rest. Viviana didn't waste any time. 2 days after the party, she knocked on my door at 10 o'clock sharp, carrying a stack of envelopes in one hand and her tablet in the other. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her expression told me we were past the pleasantries phase. She spread everything out on the kitchen counter and opened the top folder. They're going to try again, he said. But this time, it won't be through charm. It will be legal. I watched her put the pages together one by one. Letters, emails, screenshots, digital trails, left by Mateo and Marisa's recent activity. Viviana had discreetly hired a private investigator to monitor any financial or legal activity involving my name. What she discovered was subtle but unmistakable. Mateo had contacted a small law firm in another state, inquiring about power of attorney transfers and elder care authorizations. Marisa was texting with someone about hiring a notary for in-home documentation. Viviana tapped one of the documents with her index finger. "They're going to make it look official, hand-delivered personal. They think you're nice enough to sign something if they come crying?" He stared at me. "I need you to do exactly as I say." I didn't argue, not because I was afraid, but because I now understood something I hadn't fully accepted before. It wasn't about misunderstandings or emotional distance. It was about control. Mateo and Marisa didn't want to help me. They wanted what they believed was no longer worth managing on my own. That afternoon, we invited some neighbors over for coffee. Nothing formal, just a casual get-together with trays of fruit and sweets. Enough people to create a social atmosphere without raising suspicion. Viviana instructed the doorman to let Mateo and Marisa in if they showed up. She didn't invite them, but made sure someone informed them. Then he placed a recording device under the side table near the sofa and sat back as if we were just waiting for the weather to change. It took less than 20 minutes. Mateo knocked on the door. I opened it without hesitation. He smiled as if we were old friends reuniting. Marisa stood behind him, holding a small gift bag with gold tissue paper sticking out of the opening. She was wearing a light pink dress and pearls. They had rehearsed it meticulously. Mateo entered first with effusive greetings and jokes about just passing through. Marisa placed the bag on the table and took out a tin of homemade cookies. I thanked her without emotion. Viviana watched silently from her chair. After 5 minutes of superficial conversation, Mateo leaned forward, his hands folded. "I brought something for you to take a look at," he said. He took a folder out of his briefcase and extracted a stapled document. The first page had bold letters across the top. Family Welfare and Property Agreement. Viviana glanced quickly at the title and crossed her legs. Mateo slid the papers across the table toward me. "Just something to make things easier so we can help coordinate medical matters, ease the process in case something urgent comes up." He smiled again, a smile that was too long, too forced. I picked up the first page and read silently. The document was 6 pages long. In the middle was a paragraph labeled Temporary Power of Attorney, followed by another titled Financial Oversight Clause. The language was careful, not overtly predatory, but it gave Mateo full access to act on my behalf regarding medical and financial decisions. It also authorized him to open and manage bank accounts with joint access. I placed the paper on the table without saying a word. Viviana stood up, walked to the kitchen, grabbed a second folder, and came back. From it, she pulled out an almost identical document, but this one had a red line drawn down the middle. "This is a copy of the version you drafted last week with that paralegal at the CMI," he told Mateo. "The original email has a timestamp. The language is the same word for word." Mateo's face froze. Marisa remained silent, her mask of sweetness beginning to crack. Viviana turned to me. "Go ahead, ask them what this is really for." I didn't need to. The silence revealed everything. Viviana opened the recording app on her tablet and left it visible. Then she raised her voice enough for the neighbors to hear. "I want everyone to know that this document was designed to strip Elvira of her financial rights under the guise of assistance. This is what family manipulation looks like." Mateo stood up quickly. "You don't understand what we're trying to do," he protested. Marisa grabbed his arm tightly. Viviana remained absolutely calm. "No, I understand exactly, And so does the state of Guadalajara and the Ethics Council and the community they're trying to impress with fake tears and cookies. Mateo's voice faltered. You're making a scene. Viviana laughed once a sharp sound. Scandal. No, this is clarity. She turned to me and nodded. I walked over to the table, picked up the contract they brought, and tore it in half, slowly maintaining eye contact with my son. The room fell completely silent. The neighbors stopped talking. Mateo looked at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes in years. Fear. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I simply held up the torn pages and said, "This is what happens when you mistake silence for weakness." Viviana gestured toward the door. Mateo and Marisa left this time without looking back. I sat down slowly, my hands still warm from the paper. Viviana brought me a glass of water. The neighbors murmured, then politely excused themselves and left. When the room was empty, Viviana spoke softly. They're going to try something else. I agreed. I knew it too. But what they didn't know was that we were now in the lead and I wasn't just holding the line. I was ready to take it all back, piece by piece, name by name. And this time, they'd never see what was coming. 3 mornings after I tore her contract in half, I opened the front door and found a white orchid on the doormat. No card, no note, just the plant delicate and perfect. Like a silent apology, she didn't have the courage to knock. I stood there for a long time, not touching it. The air was warm, the hallway quiet. On the other side, Viviana's door opened. She came out holding a cup of coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. He saw the orchid and stopped. They're changing tactics, he said without even blinking. I nodded once and left the plant where it was. I went back inside, locked the door, and surrendered to the silence. I knew what that orchid meant. It wasn't an apology. It was a probe. That night, they came again, this time, not together. Mateo showed up around 6, wearing a blue polo shirt she remembered buying him for a job interview that never worked out. Her smile was more restrained than usual. She was carrying a small paper bag from the Italian restaurant on Main Street. She said she figured he hadn't had dinner yet. I didn't open the screen door. He stood there for a while, saying I looked fine, asking if I liked the neighborhood, claiming he and Marisa had been talking, that they felt terrible about how things had escalated. He said he missed me. I didn't say anything. He eventually dropped the bag on the bench near the wall and left. I watched him leave without moving. The next morning, it was Marisa's turn. She appeared shortly before noon with a shopping bag and a book under her arm. Her tone was lighter, almost casual, as if it were something she always did. He didn't mention the broken contract. He didn't mention the party. He just said he wanted to stop by, maybe help with the housework, cook something if I was tired. She used to call me by my first name. That day she called me Mom. I watched her through the peephole until she gave up and left. She took the groceries with her, left the book. A week passed like this. One came then, the other sometimes with food, sometimes with flowers. They once left a framed photo of Mateo as a child, holding a fishing rod next to me on a pier. A memento they thought could be used as an emotional weapon. I didn't respond, but I watched and recorded everything. Viviana gave me a small device no bigger than a car key. It stayed near the door, always turning on when someone approached. I didn't use it to catch them saying anything explicitly criminal. I used it to record the tone, the hesitations, the patterns, because their words weren't about repair. They were about access. Each conversation revolved around comfort worry, and eventually logistics bills, end-of-life planning, the language of thieves pretending to be caregivers. Viviana collected the recordings and shared them with Graciela. The lawyer didn't say much at first. She just listened, took notes, and asked about correspondence, emails, and calls. Then, she discovered something alarming. Mateo had requested a change of address for my bank's correspondence. I had done it online, using an old phone number that had been linked to my name for years. Graciela found it through an informal verification she requested from a bank contact. It hadn't been processed yet, but it was a clear red flag. Viviana changed the locks on the mailboxes the next day. The following night, the fire alarm in my hallway went off around 2:00 a.m. There was no fire, just a pulled lever. Ramirez, the night guard, checked the security camera and captured a blurry figure passing by in the service hallway 20 minutes earlier. I couldn't see the face, but I could make out the jacket, the same one Mateo wore at the party. I asked Viviana to call Graciela again. She brought a laptop the next day and guided me through setting up secure digital alerts. Any attempt to access my accounts, any login from an unrecognized device, any file request linked to my name, I agreed to all the measures. I asked her if she thought they'd given up. She didn't answer immediately. "They're going to try the back door now," she finally said. I asked what that meant. "They're going to try it legally again, but not directly. They're going to find someone to do it for them. A notary, a mobile witness, a financial advisor who doesn't know the whole story." 2 days later, a man in dress pants and a collared shirt knocked on my door. He said he represented an elder planning group. She claimed my family had requested a quick review of my estate plan just to make sure everything was in order. She smiled as if it was perfectly normal for women in their 70s to receive surprise visits from well-dressed strangers holding folders and government documents. I informed her I already had a legal team and closed the door. He left quickly. Graciela filed a formal complaint the next morning at the Guadalajara State Office of Professional Protection. Nothing dramatic, just enough to create a record, a documentary trail. I knew what was going on. They were trying to make me look unstable, disorganized, vulnerable. Because if they couldn't get me to sign voluntarily, they would try to prove that I didn't have the capacity to manage my own affairs. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and reread the apartment's deed. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal. I whispered my name aloud, not for drama, but for clarity. Then I saved the document in its folder, closed the gate, and locked it. The doorbell rang again later that week. This time, Mateo brought wine. Marisa was waiting near the elevator. He didn't ask to come in. He asked to talk. He said things had been difficult. He said the family should stay together. He said maybe we could talk about some practical things. I didn't open the door all the way. I just spoke through the crack. "Don't come back." His voice wavered, not from sadness, but from anger disguised as confusion. I didn't respond. I waited. He left. I went back to the kitchen, sat down, and made a list. 3 columns. What they tried, what failed, what would never be forgiven. I wasn't defending myself anymore. I was documenting, preparing. The storm had passed, but the damage it left behind would serve as proof, and I would be the only one carrying it forward piece by piece until they had nothing left to claim. When the envelope arrived, it came in a plain white package. No return address, no postage stamp, just slipped under my door like a silent threat. I found it early one morning, while making tea, still half asleep, my sandals scuffling on the cold floor. At first, I thought it might be another apology letter or a card from one of the book club ladies, but the weight told me otherwise. It wasn't soft. It wasn't personal. It was stiff-heavy inside. It wasn't a letter. It was 6 printed pages stapled together. Each page was filled with legal language designed to confuse, to intimidate. They'd hired a lawyer, or at least they wanted me to think so. The letter claimed that for health and safety reasons, Mateo and Marisa were filing a petition for guardianship review. They claimed to have evidence of mental deterioration and were concerned for my well-being. They said my recent financial decisions had been erratic and could pose a danger to me and others. I sat down slowly, rereading that line 3 times. It said my decisions were erratic. Me. The woman who managed the budget for an emergency clinic for over a decade. The one who dealt with invoices and vendor disputes while my husband worked nights. The one who stretched 2 modest retirements during a severe market downturn. And they called me unstable. I didn't cry. I laughed. Then I picked up the phone and called Viviana. By noon, Graciela was at my door with a copy of the same letter, which had also been sent to Viviana's law firm. They tried sending it there as well, probably hoping she would panic or pressure me to give in. They didn't understand who Viviana really was. Graciela placed her laptop on the counter and opened a document titled Protective Response Package. The process was already underway. She was just inserting the final elements. Transcripts, photographs, the audio recording of Mateo's visit. Copies of the checks they'd sent me weeks earlier, with little notes on the memo lines that said things like, just in case you need help deciding. Graciela read the letter with studied calm, pointing out phrases clearly taken from online legal templates. Some of the statements didn't even align with actual Jalisco law. They lacked details. The terminology was misused. They want to scare you, Graciela said. This isn't about your health, it's about control. I nodded. We didn't need to file anything officially yet, but Graciela contacted a friend at the court office to pre-register all the materials. If anything formal came up, we'd be prepared. By the end of the day, Viviana had sent a formal response worded like a velvet-wrapped blade, warm but firm, the kind of letter that didn't just refute. It warned. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I called my doctor not because I was worried, but because I wanted official records. I scheduled a comprehensive cognitive exam and a wellness panel scheduled for that same week. I passed them all with flying colors. Stable blood pressure, steady reflexes, sharp memory processing speed, even faster than most people half my age. 2 days later, the results were in a folder in Graciela's hands. I asked her to make 3 copies. I sent one to Mateo. No note, just the report. A week passed, then 2. No calls, no visits, no letters slipped under my door. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd backed off, but that was my mistake, because while I savored the silence, they were busy elsewhere. Viviana received the alert first. I had set up a monitoring system through the land registry office. Every time a lien investigation or dispute was filed against my name or address, she would be notified. That's how we discovered they had sent a request to the bank that held my savings account. They were trying to register as co-beneficiaries. It wasn't a legal move. It was a desperate attempt. Marisa had called pretending to be me, claiming she'd forgotten her online login and asking to update the beneficiaries over the phone. The employee immediately flagged the attempt as suspicious. My age and voice pattern didn't match. The bank froze the request and logged it as an incident, but the fact that they had tried at all showed how far they were willing to go. They didn't even care how desperate they seemed anymore. I stared at the bank report for a long time that night, not with anger, just with contemplative stillness. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about erasing me. They wanted my freedom, my dignity, my name on the ink paper next to theirs. Proof that they had power, that I needed them. Viviana and Graciela made sure that all the accounts were legally protected with third-party oversight. No new names, no unauthorized beneficiaries. Everything would be transferred to a foundation if anything happened to me, one I had quietly created months earlier. It wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring no one could control me again. Later that week, Graciela handed me another envelope thicker than the last. Inside were 2 sworn statements, one from my former landlord and one from a neighbor. Witnesses to the nights when Mateo and Marisa left me outside refused to open the door. They told the children I was being dramatic, There was also an authenticated statement from the community nurse who saw my bruises when I fell. She confirmed that no one in my family showed up to pick me up from the emergency room. They wanted to build a case against me. I was already building a wall around myself, brick by brick, document by document, truth by truth, and each page was more compelling than the last. There was a sentence in Graciela's summary that stuck with me. Attackers with superficial motives underestimate the power of a long memory. She was right. I remembered everything, and now the court does too. The law does too, and soon they would remember it too. The invitation came from Mateo. A simple, short, and polite text message. He asked me if I'd be willing to come to his house for dinner next Sunday. He said the kids missed me. He said they'd like to start over. He ended the message with a hopeful line about family and forgiveness. I stared at those words for a long time, letting them sink in. I knew what it was. I'd seen the pattern forming. Viviana had seen it. Graciela had predicted it almost exactly. They tried legal pressure. That failed. The fake attempt at guardianship didn't prosper. The beneficiary's trick was discovered and blocked. And now came the charm offensive. I still agreed. I told him I'd be there at 6. On Sunday, I wore a modest navy blue dress with a high neck and long sleeves. I tied my hair back and wore my gold watch, the one Carlos gave me for our 25th anniversary. I carried nothing but a thin envelope in my bag and my most serene expression. The house hadn't changed. White siding, a new roof, a wreath on the door, as if those details could hide the bitterness permeating the walls. Marisa greeted me with a tense smile. Her eyes scanned my outfit, trying to interpret it as a sign. She stepped aside, allowing me in with a firm, controlling hand on my back. The dining room table was set for 7. Mateo sat at the head of the table. The children were dressed up, their shirts too formal for a Sunday, their eyes flicking between me and their parents. We sat down, ate, and the food was good, a little too perfect. They talked about the children's grades and how Mateo was considering a job change. Marisa praised the dish she'd prepared twice in a tone that begged for approval. I nodded politely. I answered when asked. I didn't mention anything about the past few months, and neither did they, at least not directly. Halfway through dessert, Mateo leaned back in his chair and let out a carefully rehearsed sigh. I've been thinking a lot lately about how things got complicated, and I know we all made mistakes, but I hate the distance between us. Marisa reached out to take his hand, and with the children growing up, she added, "We just don't want regrets. We want them to know how a real family behaves." I nodded. "I appreciate that," I replied. "I really do." They smiled, and then Mateo finally got to the point. I wondered if at some point we could talk about how to move forward, perhaps revisit some of the decisions that were made when things were tense, especially regarding estate matters. There, it was, the velvet glove removed, revealing the hand that had always been underneath. I let the silence stretch on long enough. Then I reached for my bag and took out the envelope. "Sure," I said calmly, "but I think it's best if we all make ourselves perfectly clear." So I prepared something. I slid the envelope across the table. Marisa's fingers twitched before she could control the movement. Mateo opened the envelope. Inside was a legally authenticated enclosure. It outlined the permanent establishment of the Elvira Ruiz Foundation, the non-profit organization he had officially formed. It confirmed that the house where he now lived, the bank accounts, the trust fund, everything was legally and irrevocably linked to the foundation. It listed the beneficiaries a scholarship program for single mothers over 60, an assistance fund for victims of elder abuse, and a community healthcare program in Carlos's name. Mateo's face hardened. Marisa's smile cracked at the edges. "Oh, look," I explained gently. "I've thought about this a lot too, And I realized I don't want to spend the rest of my life worrying about who deserves what, or who thinks they earned a piece of something they never helped build. Matteo swallowed. I could see the heat growing behind his eyes. He was holding back, trying to maintain his composure. I'm not cutting them off completely, I added, but I'm choosing peace, clarity, and protection. No one said anything. The children remained motionless, confused, too young to understand the undercurrents, but old enough to feel the tension that settled thickly in the air. I got up slowly. Dinner was delicious. Thank you. Marissa started to speak, but her words stumbled. She tried to smile again, but gave up halfway. At the front door, Matteo followed me. Is that all? He asked quietly. I kept walking. Mom, he said again, a little louder, a little sharper. We were trying to work things out. I finally turned around. No, I replied calmly. You did this. His shoulders slumped, as if for the first time he realized he couldn't shift the blame onto me. I didn't think it would go this far, he murmured. I nodded. That's the thing about boundaries. Once you cross them, you're not the one who decides where they end. He seemed to want to say more, but closed his mouth. Viviana came up to me. We should go back inside. And we returned. When the judge returned, he didn't hesitate. Motion granted. The forged documents were declared invalid. The Foundation's charter was protected. A formal recommendation was sent to the district attorney's office for further investigation. And with that, it was over, at least in the eyes of the court. But for me, it was something deeper. I had stood up to a system that historically ignored women like me, dismissed our voices, assumed we were too fragile or confused or too emotional. And I had been heard. I didn't win because I shouted the loudest. I won because I refused to look away. I won because I kept my records, told the truth, and trusted silence to do its work. That night, I sat on the balcony with Viviana and Graciela. We shared peach cobbler and let the sea breeze blow in. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The truth had spoken for us. And for the first time, it was enough. 3 weeks after the verdict, I stood on the small stage in the new community center, holding a microphone with hands that no longer trembled. In front of me were nearly 100 faces. Some I knew well. Some I had helped through difficult winters, prolonged divorces, or lonely birthdays. Some I had never met but were there because the Foundation had reached them in some way. That was enough. The space wasn't elegant. Folding chairs, thermoses of coffee on plastic tables, a few old ceiling fans whirring overhead. But the walls were freshly painted and decorated with photos of our programs, women learning trades, elder care volunteers, hugging patients, children laughing next to carefully packed donation boxes. I didn't prepare a formal speech. I didn't want to make a scene. I just told the truth. This organization was never about money. I started slowly pausing to steady my breathing. It was about not being erased, about showing that the second half of life can be as powerful as the first, maybe even more so. They applauded, but I didn't let the moment linger. I handed the microphone to Liana and walked off stage. She represented the future now. Her voice, her leadership, her energy. I had laid the foundation. They would build the rest. After the event, the people stayed. Some cried, some hugged me. One woman handed me a note that simply said, "Thanks to you, I had the courage to ask for custody of my grandson." I slipped the note into my coat pocket and quietly slipped out the back door. That afternoon, I planted 3 new apple trees at the edge of my yard. I don't know if I'll live to see them bear fruit, but planting something you may never harvest is a leap of faith. Not in yourself, but in the world that will come after you. If you've ever felt discarded, invisible, or underestimated simply because of your age, your silence, or your kindness, keep this in mind. You still have the power to draw boundaries, to claim your space, to plant something new. Even when the world tries to convince you that your time is past, Mateo never contacted me again. For a long time, I imagined some grand apology, an emotional call, a letter full of regret, but it never came. Instead, I received a package from his lawyer. Inside was a signed settlement agreement, waiving any remaining claims to the foundation or the properties still in my name. No note, no explanation. He had chosen silence over redemption. I accepted it not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed anything from him. His chapter in my life had ended long ago. He simply hadn't realized it until the door closed behind him. The next morning, I donated his last childhood belongings to the local shelter's thrift store. Not out of anger, just for clarity. Some things don't need to be kept inside, they need to be released. In the following days, I began walking every morning 5 kilometers at dawn, sometimes alone, sometimes with neighbors who joined me in respectful silence. We never spoke of what had happened. We didn't need it. They'd followed the story unfolding in the newspapers, on television, through whispered comments in the supermarket aisles. But walking beside me was a form of unspoken respect, and that was worth more than any formal apology. One morning, on the path behind the orchard, I saw a young woman sitting on a bench with her young son. She looked exhausted, as if the world had weighed on her shoulders for too long. As I passed, she called out to me, "You're Elvira, aren't you? The woman who fought against the family." I smiled softly. "I'm Elvira, but I didn't fight. I just refused to disappear." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. That was all. No further words were needed. That afternoon, I planted 3 new apple trees at the edge of my yard. I don't know if I'll live to see them bear fruit, but planting something you may never harvest is an act of faith. Not in yourself, but in the world that will come after you. Graciela visited us again that weekend. We drank tea, laughed at a news segment that had mispronounced her name, and talked about organizing a writing workshop for retired women next spring. "Stories," she said, "are the last thing they can't steal." When she left, I stood by the window watching the wind rustle the leaves in the trees. The kind of wind that doesn't knock things over, but reminds them they can stand. The knock on the door came 3 months after the verdict. I opened it without hesitation. Olivia Maurice's sister was standing there looking smaller than I remembered. "They're getting divorced," he said without preamble. I didn't respond. "Mateo is living in an apartment near the center. She's back to teaching. Maurice's selling the house." I nodded, hoping she'd get to the point. Olivia looked uncertain, fiddling with the strap of her bag. "The boys are asking about you," she finally said. "I thought you'd like to know." I thanked her for the information and offered her a coffee. She politely declined. "You were right, you know," she said as she turned to leave. "Mostly." I closed the door softly behind her. It wasn't about being right. It was never about that. 3 weeks later, I received a postcard. No return address, just my address. On the back, a single line written in a man's handwriting. Now I understand. I put the card in a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. The most important battles don't end with trumpets and fanfare. They end in silence, in recognition, in subtle changes that take years to fully manifest. Today, the Elvira Ruiz Foundation serves more than 500 women each year. We have 3 branches and a mentoring program that connects women over 60 with young students. We receive a small grant from the municipal government. We raised enough donations to buy a modest building in the city center. Some mornings, when the sun is still low and the beach is almost empty, I walk to the water's edge and remember that night under the bridge soaked by the rain, invisible to the world. I remember the woman I was shivering with cold and shame. And then I look at the woman I've become. I'm no longer invisible. I'm no longer silent when it matters. I no longer pretend that love must mean erasure. The water still washes the sand, constant, relentless. The waves still come, they still go. But now when I go home, I don't double-check the locks. I don't worry about what might be stolen, because I've discovered that at 72, I've learned something I wish I'd known when I was 20. True dignity isn't something others can take away from you. It's something you regain inch by inch when you finally decide to stand up. If my story touched any part of your heart today, remember, you're not finished. You're not invisible. You're still writing your story. And maybe, just maybe, it's about to begin. Now, if you enjoyed this story, click on this next video that's appearing on the screen because it contains a tale of betrayal and twist like you've never seen before.